Within our words, an unseen power is set in motion. The tongue is a small thing, but like a tiny spark, can set a great forest on fire. Once spoken, our words begin blazing a trail through the hearts and lives of those around us. One kind word can demolish guilt. It can inspire hope. But the same words have also embraced hatred and executed innocence. Once spoken, our words scorch through feelings and emotions on a level that only they can produce. Your words set up a chain of events beyond your control and of which you will never know. One word can destroy beliefs, harden hearts, or cultivate hatred. But they can also demonstrate faith, display forgiveness, and nurture love. The power of life and death lies in a single word, and we, the image of God, have this power in one word.
I want to tell you a story. Communication is such an important thing, especially if you've got growing up teenagers. Now, there comes a time where we actually had to tell our son, Pelly, 12 o'clock at night is your curfew. And I mean, 12 o'clock was a straight head-on curfew. And one night we were coming back from the movies, Michelle and I, and it was just incredible to see. After the movie, we were pumped up and we were talking and we were communicating and we really loved the movie, so we were speaking. But as we arrived home and we opened our electronic gates, the gates opened, and because we've been hijacked before, we were very cautious to just sit in the vehicle and wait until those gates close before we actually go into the garage. But lo and behold, as those gates are about to close, a body comes rushing through, none other than my son. I want to tell you, Michelle yelled at the top of her voice, and I had the fright of my life. And it was my son, and he likes to, made it, Dad, I made it. Man, I wanted to kill him. Come on. You know, that's teenagers for you. But one thing is for certain, in terms of communication, he made it. He just made it. Well, when we think of communication, I'm going to ask Michelle to just come up here. Remember the good old days where we had practical ways of communication. Do you remember this one? Can you just imagine that it was going to be, hello, hello, hello. Thank you, Michelle. I must tell you one thing. Thank heavens we don't have to communicate that way anymore. Can you imagine standing on the one mountaintop and having to shout to the other mountaintop? Communication has changed. And hopefully you and I will know that cellular phones are a good thing. Of course, it becomes a menace, especially if you're busy talking and the cell phone goes off. And there's always an inappropriate time for a cell phone to go off. But they're great, and they're there to help us. But in the illustration, you saw the dominoes really falling perpetually and not stopping. And it started and it ended with one thing that says one word. One word of communication can change the entire feeling of a home. All you need is a father to call a son stupid, and you have labeled him. All you need is for a wife to call a husband lazy, and she's spoken that over him. One thing that is very true is that Proverbs 18:21 says that the tongue has the power of life and death. So you have life and death in your hands through the power of your tongue. The question is, how will you use it? You can use the very same tongue to break someone down or to build someone up. It's your choice. So what will it be? There's nothing like, if you know somebody's love language, my wife's love language, as you know now, is words of encouragement. And just looking at her this morning and said to her, you look beautiful. She can't help it. That little smile comes and she just starts smiling. And I just see teeth in her hair, I always say. But you see, it's the power of the tongue. It's the words that you and I use to make a difference. You must know that that very tongue of yours is really what sets everything in motion. Everything that you do depends on the way that you speak to one another. Even when there's a problem, if you and I speak to each other, but it's lovingly, we can handle everything. But when we speak and the anger comes across and the frustration comes across and we really minimize the person when we speak, that's when communication takes its toll. Because you see, the very words that we speak can crush either the emotion or the feeling. Imagine when you and I speak, we do crush that person. That's not effective communication. Your tongue has the power of life or death. So I invite you today to act godly, speak out God's word, and to use it His way. Because you see, in James 3, it says the following: if any man is to keep in check or in control his tongue. He's able to control the whole human being, the whole man. This little thing. Like Michelle sometimes says, if you want to say something, bite on your tongue and bite hard. Make sure you don't say it. Prevent yourself from saying that. The beautiful illustration in James 3 says this, that the tongue is like a bit in the mouth of a horse. Imagine this beautiful animal, with the power, the energy that you harness with a bit in the mouth. And you and I are able to control and command that horse purely by that control. He gives another illustration. He says, a huge freight ship has a little rudder. Can you imagine that huge ship, tons and tons of masses of, whether it's cement or whatever, on the water, is directed by this little rudder. But obviously, because of the little rudder, if that big ship wants to turn, it takes quite a while. Because as you swing the rudder, it will take quite a wide circle to complete. And it says this, and I think this is the most powerful illustration. The tongue is like a fire. It's like a fire that explodes. You and I need to know that this very fire can set a whole ablaze. A whole felt can come ablaze. What will you do as a father, as a mother, to share with your children that you really value them? You know, the role modeling that we spoke about earlier, it is so vital here. Because a father and a mother that speak badly to one another, remember, your children are going to do exactly the same. So when their child backchats, don't you dare speak to me that way. Hello, where did they see it? They saw it from you and me. So the invite is, let's start acting godly. Let's make sure that when you and I speak, that we don't misappropriate God's gift of communication. And the tongue has the power of life or death. That's your choice. So when we talk about communication, there's really two stages. As I just pick up my book, the two stages of communication is, firstly, is the sending of information, and secondly will be the receiving of information. Now, it's so easy to send all the time, because you send the communication and you send it, but do we ever stop to wait for it to come back? Take our prayer life. Isn't that crazy? Lord, give me this. Lord, do this for me. Will you help me with this? But we never stop to say, can you speak back to me? So that we listen. So the sending and the receiving of information is absolutely vital. Because when we talk about communication, there's various stages. What gets involved in good communication? Well, the first thing is the messenger. Messenger today will be me. I am basically the messenger to bring you a message with communication. Then there's a method. What method am I using? I'm talking. Because you can speak without speaking. I want to tell you that your wife has to give you that look. She doesn't have to say a word, and you'll know. That medium is actually very effective. The method, well, the method is I'm using my mouth to communicate. So what you have is that I'm the messenger. I have to bring a message to you. A method that you use is either verbal or non-verbal. The medium can be speaking, can be a text SMS, can be a video clip, various mediums. And what really makes the communication after that is the receiver. You need to receive what we're busy doing. So let's just go through that again. I'm the messenger. There's a method that I'm using. There's a medium that I'm using. And you are the receivers. Now, generally speaking, when we look at the market, we now think that's communication. But it's not communication yet. Because there's one critical step missing before you and I can communicate. Guess what that is? Feedback. Until you speak back to me, we haven't communicated. Think of your children. The whole day, we just give and we give and we give. Do we ever wait for them to speak back? Don't you talk back to me, go to your room. That's why it's not effective. If we embrace our children to speak back with us, it's a total different scenario. So you want to know that the whole process of communication actually takes quite a while. You want to make sure that when they speak with you, that you get feedback. And if you don't get feedback, you need to know something is missing. For instance, a husband and a wife had a bit of a tiff. He disappears into the garage. He works with the car and the engine, because the engine doesn't backchat, ladies, okay? and that's just what he's going to do. So if you get to that stage where he's not speaking to you, You need to realize you need to solicit these feedback, otherwise you don't have effective communication. But then what about roles and responsibilities? I'm going to ask Michelle to come up here again, and I'd just like to explain this to you. If you can just come here, my sweetheart. Because you see, when it comes to roles and responsibilities in the marriage, it's very much, now you remember from the previous session, session number 1, I'm the leader, and Michelle's session number 1 is she's the helper. She's now helping me illustrate this point. But when it comes to communication, sometimes what men do is, what we do is we have this long rope that sort of keeps on going. Now, imagine if Michelle chose to walk anywhere, did I have control over her? Even if I want to pull her, no control. Can you guys see that? There's nothing that I can do. Well, this is the first part you need to understand in that communication of the way that you lead when you communicate. There has to be a connection. We think we're connected purely by positioning. I'm the leader, you the helper. But you know what? This road clearly illustrates that it's not effective. But then men get a bit uptight. And you know what they do? They actually ask their wives to come and help them. But what they're doing all the time is that they're roping them. And they're roping them. Now, is there any freedom of movement? How do you think she feels? Ladies? You want to tell me? Not happy, that's for sure. Definitely not happy. You see, because leading this way, that you're so tight, that she has no space to move in, is also not effective. But what you and I want to do is really to unravel, and say to ourselves, how much is enough? And I believe that leading says that the man would, if I had to go in this direction, if you can turn with me, if I had to lead, she moves with me. And if I say to her, can you just quickly turn around? Can you see we're still connected? Now, if she wants to go too far, that's far enough. Can you see? And there's not necessary to jerk the rope. It's here because it's an arm's length. So guys, the way that you lead your wife is at arm's length. Make sure that you're far enough that she can follow you, but close enough that she can feel you, because it's about connection. Thank you so much. You and I want to make sure that when we lead diligently, that we lead God's way. It's the way that God has put us together. God, in His infinite wisdom, came and said to you and I, I've made you the way that I've made you, and I haven't made a mistake. You have to understand that you and I do things in a specific way. But when I say that we do things in a specific way, you have to understand it's the way that God wired us. You know how He wired us? Ever heard of the terms choleric, sanguine, phlegmatic, and melancholy? Not? Okay. Let's make that practical. As I come over here, a brief lesson, because before you understand this, you won't understand the true nature of communication. Now, when I speak about a choleric, I'm really speaking about a person, what we call with a D behavioral style, or a person with a driving behavioral style. D for driver. It means that that person, whether male or female, loves to drive a situation. They're always in charge. Then we have the I. The I stands for influencer. This is the kind of person that says, I lead by influencing people. Well, I associate myself when I influence people. Now, influence can be positive and can be negative. Isn't that true? We'll speak about that just now. Then the S. The S stands for supporter. That's a supporting kind of person that supports one another. And then the C, I'm going to call this the clued up analyst. Clued up analyst. These are the people that are very analytical. Another way of saying that they are very conscientious. These are hardworking people. So let me go through that again. Your driver, your influencer, your supporter, and your clued up analyst. So how does that come into play with who you are, with communication? The truth is, the driving kind of personality person, when he really communicates, it's always about control, because they want to remain in control. And they're a little bit more forceful. Often, people misunderstand them and say, he's so arrogant. But it's just the strength of character that comes through. So we need discernment to say, how strong is that person really? It doesn't mean if he's got a strong, firm way of speaking that he's ungodly. It's just this built-up energy that God has given that person to say, you are made in this way. What about the influencer? Or also referred to as the sanguine. That is the person that really likes fun. Now, influence, as I said, is positive or could be negative. That's why so many young people today will role model the guy with the black beamer, the money, and he's a drug peddler. Why? He's got power, mandla. But you know what? That's negative influence. Because then our youth follows the negative influence, they get nowhere. Because they get involved in what they shouldn't be involved in. So how does that permeate through your life and my life? Influence can be exerted positively. There is no stronger influence than the solid foundation of the value system of a mother in the home. A father is responsible for the discipline in the home, but a mother is responsible to God for the value in the home. Now, if she is an high I, an influencer, she is that person that will influence the children at all times. And she'll say, come on, let's have some fun, let's go out, let's do things. And the kids would love that, because that's what the responsibility of the high I would be. What about the supporter? Well, the supporter does it in a different way. The supporting kind of person that says, I'm always there for you. So when they communicate in a way that's always, in a sense, agreeing. Yes, that's a wonderful idea. They love to agree with you, because that's how they best add their value to the home. Now, the supporter is the more quiet person. And then you have, lastly, what I said, the clued-up analyst. What does the clued-up analyst do? Well, they bring the facts to any situation. We need to go here on that date and arrive at that time. They normally are very structured. Their no is their no, and their yes is their yes. You can try and spin them around your finger, you won't get very far. Because remember, they are cognitively very strong. They're clued up. So as I come back to this board over here, I just want to illustrate the following. You'll find that the D and the I are extroverts. They are the people that are very extrovertal in their behavioral style. But if you come over here, the C and the S, on this side, they are introverts. So how does introvert and extrovert play a role in terms of communication? It's obvious that you and I, when we communicate extrovertly, people know about it. We speak, they hear. But the person that's an introvert can sometimes communicate and you don't see it. Because what they've done, they've taken their feelings on the inside and they suppress those feelings because they want to remain in control, deep inside. Therefore, it takes special qualities for a husband to stop and to say, why are you so quiet? I don't know. You have to make that plan of understanding what to do, what to draw out of them. That's the introvert versus the extrovert. But the sad part is this. When it comes to insecurity, that your insecurity and my insecurity will play a vital role of how we basically communicate. Because the very D that's normally in charge and in control of things, well, the negative is when they're insecure, they become too controlling. Can you see that? That's not good. And the I, that's normally the influencer, what do? Well, they become competitive. They start competing with you because of a sense of comparing. Because they will compare you with the next person and you become very comparing. What will the S do? Well, they're normally very supportive, but when they're insecure, they become very conceding. They just say, yes, that's fine, yes, that's fine. But on the inside, they're really not happy. You know, it's like they're saying that I agree with you, but on the inside they're standing up and they're not saying the way they really feel. And then the clued up analyst, what happens to them? Well, if they're insecure, they become condemning. They condemn you. You are guilty. And they condemn you in a negative way. So that doesn't really help. So coming back to mom and dad agree, how do we really put it all together? I'd like to say to you that apart from all these ways of communication, we need to say to ourselves that communication is more about listening than speaking. Because the three principles that will make a difference is when you and I listen instead of interrupting. That is cardinal. You and I want to make sure that when we speak, we do that. It is so interesting when we look at the different phases, that the teenager stage. You know, there's a stage where you try and get him to talk. Don't even expect just more than a grunt in the morning. I mean, I'm morning, Dad. I mean, I remember a time I wanted to pay my son to actually basically speak to me, to say, hey, Pete, $1 just to say morning. Morning. Morning, Dad was a bit of a push. All right. Because we all go through the stages, but we all will evolve in getting through those stages. But that's okay, because that's exactly what will happen. But you and I are constantly in this challenge of what's going to happen when we don't agree. Because when you and I don't agree when it comes to communication, what is the result? Conflict. Well, conflict is a good thing. It says something is wrong and we need to do something about it. But how we handle the conflict is maybe not that a good thing, because sometimes our behavioral style can get way ahead of us. So what I will be doing now, I'm going to use an illustration to explain to us how this works better. Thank you, Colin and Jacqueline, for helping with this illustration. They're going to have a fight. In fact, I'm going to teach them how to have a godly fight. Well, look at him, he's laughing right now, but I promise you, at home, it doesn't work this easily. So I'm going to give you the principle of fighting. The first one is F, for facing each other. Now, this is exactly the way I would like you to start a fight when you do have one in your home. And that is that the two of you face one another. Because facing each other, there's so much of the emotion that you and I can read. Isn't it true that sometimes the husband will be sitting in the lounge with the Kazam, channel 1, channel 2. She's in the kitchen, and he shouts from here to there, but there's no face-to-face communication. They're just not connecting. This way, being face-to-face, and I can just see that this is really bringing them to a point of connection. So F for face each other. The next one in the word fights is the letter I. Isolate the issue. Now, I really want to say, can you just lift up your finger like that? Just once, that's it. Isolate the issue. That will help you understand that when you are having a good godly fight, you say, hold on, let's isolate the issue. We're going to fight about one thing and one thing only. It doesn't help to speak about the child yesterday that didn't come to supper, and then to speak about the son that didn't do this. It's one issue at a time. Isolate the issue. If you can do that, you're into the next stage of having a good godly fight. Then G, guard your tongue. Can we do this together? Guard your tongue. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for that. Because why? Women speak more than men, and that is true. Men seem to think that they are engaged all the time. But ladies, can I be honest, Jacqueline? Yeah. Guess what he does sometimes? He pretends to be listening, but he's not really listening. Okay. Okay. So yes, and when it comes to guarding your tongue, ladies, just control that tongue. No, we spoke about the introduction of the fire. Okay. The F, face each other. I, isolate the issue. G, guard your tongue. And now the H, that's right. H is really for halt history. Can you do that with me? We're going to say halt history. Halt history. In other words, when you use that, you're really saying, hold on, we're going to not talk about what happened in 1923 on the 23rd of April. You said that! Okay. Because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And isn't it true? Like, we want to really take those old things and bring them to the fight. In fact, have you ever buried a puppy? Let me ask you, have you ever buried a puppy? Yep. I mean, you don't bury the puppy with the tail sticking out, do you? And just to yank it out, you don't do that. No. It's going to be smelly. Okay? So what? Absolutely right. So you want to halt history and not refer to the past. And lastly, the T for touch. Can you see you've been touching because one of you have the love language of touch? No doubt? Yeah. Yeah, it's true. That's why you were touching. But here's the truth. The moment you're angry, don't touch me. Isn't that true? It's true. But now what I'm saying to you is, the moment you touch, you realize this is blood and water and we are connected. So face each other, isolate the issue, guard your tongue, halt history, and touch. But I want to put an S, the last letter to that. S is for stay in here. Can we do that? Let's stay right here. We're not going anywhere until that issue is resolved. Because what does it help to go to the next issue before this one is resolved? All right. Thank you, guys. Give them a hand, everybody. Come on, give them a hand. Thank you so much. So, can you go home and say, we now have a methodology that we're going to put into practice for the rest of our lives? Of course you can. But you're going to have to choose to communicate properly. Because you and I will always have this problem of we're going to have fights. We're going to have disagreements. But it's up to you and I as to what we do with the information that we've received. So many people go to a seminar and they are flying high. They drive in the car, they speak about it, it's fantastic, this is going to change our lives, until they get home. It's like when you open the front door and you close it, something happens. You switch off. What has happened? You have to engage. Communication. So from now on, when you communicate, you and I need to know it's all about both of you participating and both of you learning to connect. The truth is, when you met one another, it was more like this. He had his fist clenched, you had your fist clenched, and you basically bumping heads. Until you realize, hold on, but we both bring something to the party. And this opens up And these are your skills, your abilities, your talents, your personality, whoever you are, you bring to the conversation. And eventually, again, you'll headbutt. But can you see the surface is less? But what you want to do is then say, hold on, a slight adjustment, and voila, you and I have connection. Going back to the very beginning of the clip that we saw, the tongue has the power of life and death. I want to ask you, do you apply your wisdom to use that power to use your tongue appropriately? I want to ask you, when you look at communication, do you realize that although there's various stages involved, that the most important part is feedback? Do you realize that when you guys sit and want to now actually have a conversation, that there are 3 key elements that are vital? Number 1, whether one person speaks, the other person listens. Number 2, when the one person is speaking, the other person does not interrupt. No interruption. And number 3, make sure that you get feedback from the person that you have connected. Because where people speak to one another, there's agreement. Where there's agreement, we actually have purposeful communication. Now, don't fall into the trap to actually sit around a table and just use SMS. We once went to a holiday place, and we saw the one family, all of them had cell phones, and they all were sitting with text messaging, and they were sending messages to one another. Was it effective? They never spoke. They never connected. As opposed to us, the rowdy Van Tonder family. Man, I tell you, it sounded like a lot of Indian miners there from Durban. It did. And we looked at the two, and my kid said to me, but Dad, what is the difference? I said, you see, sometimes people use technology that they should be embracing themselves, but it counts against them. But we have stuck together as a family, and we are communicating on a proper level. So, as I close off, what will you choose to do? How are you going to choose to communicate with each other in the family? Remember, respect is permeated in the way that you speak to a person, the way that you respond, the way that you harness yourself, the way that you control yourself is going to make the difference. And I want to charge you up today. Remember, the power lies in the tongue. Use it.